Okay, so you want to buy a motorcycle. Walk into a dealership on a Saturday, pick out the one that looks fast standing still, sign a few papers, and ride home on the cheapest, most exciting transportation money can buy. And you already know the picture. 50 miles to the gallon, a parking spot anywhere in the city, an empty canyon road on a Sunday morning before the rest of the world wakes up, the commute transformed from the worst part of your day into the best one. A car costs $40,000 and seals you in a box. A motorcycle costs $12 and hands you the sky. That's the picture every riding film and every dealership poster has sold for 70 years. Here's the thing. The picture is real. The Sunday morning exists. The problem is, what happens between the picture and the reality? Because measured the one way almost nobody bothers to measure it, a motorcycle is one of the most expensive vehicles a person can own. Not the most expensive to buy, the most expensive to use. Let's start with what you think you're buying. The window sticker says $12,999. You've done the responsible thing, you've compared it to a car payment, and it looks like a bargain. Then the salesperson slides the real sheet across the desk. Freight, $600. The cost of shipping the bike from the factory, billed to you. Setup and assembly, another $500 to $800, which is a technician spending an afternoon bolting on the front wheel and mirrors of a machine that arrived 90% finished in a crate. A documentation fee, somewhere between $200 and $500 for the paperwork the dealership was always going to do anyway. Then tax, title, registration. Your $12,999 motorcycle rolls out the door at $14,700, and not $1 of that gap made the bike faster. Those line items matter more than they look because new unit margins in power sports are thin. A dealer might clear 4 to 6% on the actual machine, maybe $700 on your bike. Freight and setup is where a chunk of the real profit hides. The bike is the reason you walked in. It is not the reason the dealership exists. Hold that thought because it comes back later. Now, the purchase you didn't plan for. A motorcycle ships with no protection at all. The vehicle and the safety equipment are sold separately, and the safety equipment is you. A helmet that's actually worth wearing runs $400 to $700. An armored jacket, $300 to $500. Gloves, $100. Boots that won't fold in a crash, $250. Riding pants, another $250, and riders increasingly add an airbag vest at $500 to $700. Do it properly and you've spent $1,800 to $2,500 before your first ride. Call it 15% of the bike again. And unlike the bike, gear is a consumable. A helmet is a 5-year item or a one-drop item, whichever comes first. Drop it once on concrete, and the foam inside has done its job invisibly. The manufacturer tells you to replace it, and the manufacturer is right. The gear is only the first wave of accessories, because a stock motorcycle turns out to be a starting point rather than a finished product. The screen is too short, so that's $150. The seat that felt fine for a 10-minute test ride becomes a torture device at hour 2. So that's a $400 aftermarket saddle. Heated grips, $250 installed. Crash protection, frame sliders, or engine bars, $200. Bought specifically because of the tip-over math we'll get to later. Luggage, if you plan to actually go anywhere, is the big one. A set of hard side cases with mounting racks runs $1,000 to $1,500 on its own. Owners of adventure bikes routinely put $3,000 to $5,000 of equipment onto a $16,000 motorcycle. And here's the part that stings at the end. Almost none of it comes back. Accessories return pennies on the dollar at resale because the next buyer wants the bike, not your seat. The industry even has an affectionate word for these purchases, farkles, which should tell you how normalized the leak is. There's also a piece of paper you need that nobody budgets for, because a car license doesn't cover a motorcycle. The sane route is a certified safety course, a weekend in a parking lot on a borrowed $250 for $250 to $400, which in most states waives the riding test and in all states teaches you the counterintuitive physics that keep new riders alive, like the fact that a motorcycle at speed turns by being pushed the wrong way. Skip the course and your insurer notices, take it, and many will shave 10% off the premium, which means the class partially pays for itself. That's the last time anything in this story partially pays for itself. So, enjoy it. Then comes the phone call to the insurance company, and this is where motorcycle economics start behaving strangely. Insurance on a bike isn't priced like insurance on a car. It's priced on what the actuarial tables say about the intersection of you and that specific machine. A 45-year-old on a mid-size cruiser in the suburbs might pay $350 a year and wonder what everyone complains about. A 23-year-old on a 600 cubic centimeter supersport in a big city can be quoted $3,500, a quarter of the bike's value, every year, forever. Same license, same zip code sometimes. The difference is that the supersport category crashes more, gets stolen more, and costs more to rebuild, and the insurer prices the category, not your intentions. Plenty of first-time buyers discover this after they've signed for the bike, which is exactly the order the dealership prefers. Part of what you're paying the insurer for is a risk that has nothing to do with your riding: theft. A motorcycle is the easiest vehicle in the world to steal because it doesn't have to be started to be taken. 2 people and a van defeat every lock you can buy in under a minute. They simply pick the bike up. Sport bikes top the theft tables year after year, partly because they're desirable and partly because a stolen supersport is worth more as parts than as a motorcycle. Fairings, wheels, and forks disappear into the used parts market with no serial numbers anyone checks. Insurers know the recovery rate on stolen bikes is dismal compared to cars, and they price it into the comprehensive line. Live in an apartment without a garage in a major city, and some carriers will quietly surcharge you for the privilege of street parking. A few will decline the theft coverage outright. The bike that was supposed to park anywhere turns out to be a vehicle you're afraid to park anywhere. And while the bike sits in your garage being insured, it's doing something else quietly, shedding value. A new motorcycle gives up roughly 15 to 20% the moment it becomes a used motorcycle, and the curve depends brutally on the type. Sport bikes fall hardest. A $15,000 Supersport is a $9,500 machine 2 years later, because the used market is full of them and the next buyer knows how the last owner rode it. Big American cruisers hold their percentage better, which sounds like good news until you then notice you paid $28,000 to get on that curve. Either way, depreciation on a motorcycle has a property that car owners never think about. It happens whether you ride or not. Every year, the title ages, $1,200 to $2,000 leaves the asset silently with the bike parked. So far, these are entry costs. Here's where it gets interesting, because the running costs are where motorcycles stop being small cars and become something closer to aircraft. Start with tires. The rear tire on a family sedan lasts 50 or 60,000 miles and costs $130. The rear tire on a sport touring motorcycle lasts about 6,000. On a sticky sport tire, 3 to 4,000 one good season. The tire costs $220, mounting and balancing another $80. So call it $300 every 3,500 miles. That's more than 8 cents a mile in rear rubber alone. At the front, which lasts a little longer, and you're near 12 cents a mile in tires. The sedan is spending about 1 cent. Your fuel-sipping economy machine is spending 10 times the rubber money of an SUV. Tires are just the opening bid. A chain and sprocket set wears out every 15 to 20,000 miles, $250 in parts, $150 in labor. Brake pads come more often than on a car because there's less pad to begin with. And then there's the service most buyers have never heard of at signing, the valve clearance inspection. On many bikes, it's due every 16 to 26,000 miles. And on a fully fed sport bike, it means removing the bodywork, the tank, and sometimes the camshafts to measure clearances in thousandths of a millimeter. Labor, $600 to $1,200. Nothing was broken, nothing got faster. That's the price of confirming the engine is still healthy. And skipping it is how a $14,000 machine becomes a $6,000 machine with a ticking noise. This is why motorcycle ownership drifts almost inevitably toward the toolbox. Watch what experienced riders actually do on winter evenings. They wrench, not because they love it. Some do, but because at $140 an hour, paying the dealership for every chain adjustment and oil change turns a cheap vehicle into an expensive hobby with extra steps. The economics push you into becoming your own mechanic, which means a stand, a torque wrench, and a shelf of specialty tools that cost another $500 up front. And even the owners who happily pay discover the spring problem. Every bike in the region wakes up the same week, the service department books out a month, and your riding season starts in the queue behind everyone else's. There's one more running cost that never appears on any maintenance schedule, and every rider pays it eventually. The drop, not a crash, a tip over. The bike is stationary in a parking lot. Your boot slips on a patch of gravel and 480 pounds goes past the balance point in slow motion while you hold on and lose anyway. Nobody is hurt. The bike is barely scratched. And the estimate comes back at $2,300 because on a modern fed motorcycle, the outside is the expensive part. One painted fairing panel runs $400 to $700 from the factory, a brake lever snapped in the fall is $80, a bar end $40, a mirror $120, and the labor to make it all disappear does the rest. File it with your insurer and your premium remembers the claim for 3 years, which is why most riders eat the cost in cash or learn to live with the scars. Insurers total motorcycles over damage a car would shrug off, for the same reason. When the whole vehicle is worth $9,000 and the bodywork is a third of that, cosmetic damage and economic death sit surprisingly close together. Add it up honestly. Tires, chain, brakes, fluids, the valve service, amortized, and a modern motorcycle costs somewhere between 15 and 25 cents a mile in maintenance and consumables. That's the per-mile upkeep territory of a German luxury sedan, attached to a vehicle that was supposed to be the cheap alternative. But here's the thing. Nobody explains to you, and it's the single number that controls all motorcycle economics. How much motorcycles actually get ridden? Industry surveys put the average American motorcycle at roughly 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year, not 12,000 like a car. 2 or 3, the bike doesn't go out in the rain, it doesn't go out in January, it doesn't do the school run or the airport pickup. It goes out when the weather, the schedule, and the mood align. And those 3 things align less often than anyone admits at the point of purchase. Look at the calendar honestly, and the season shrinks further. Across the northern half of the country, the realistic riding window runs from April to October. 7 months? And that's before you subtract the rained-out weekends, the 95-degree afternoons where full gear feels like a wetsuit, and the weeks life simply takes. A rider who gets out 40 days a year is doing well. 40 days. Now the bike needs somewhere to spend the other 325, and storage is its own line item. Winterization means fuel stabilizer, a battery tender, fresh oil so acids don't sit in the engine. Call it $100 in supplies or $300 if the shop does it. City riders without garages pay real rent for a slot, $75 to $150 a month in a storage facility, which is $900 a year to keep a vehicle you're not using out of the weather. Divide the annual cost of ownership by 40 riding days instead of miles, and the number gets vivid. The average owner is paying $60 to $80 per ride. Every canyon run is a nice dinner for two. Nobody at the dealership frames it that way, for the obvious reason that nobody would sign. Now run the division. Let's say your bike costs $600 a year to insure, loses $1,500 a year to depreciation, and absorbs $150 in registration and a battery tender for the winter. That's $2,250 a year in fixed costs that arrive whether the bike moves or not. Spread over 2,500 miles, that's 90 cents a mile. Before fuel, before tires, before a single spark plug. Stack the consumables on top, and the true number crosses $1 a mile. $1 a mile on a machine sold as frugal. The $40,000 car in your driveway, doing its 12,000 boring miles a year, is running at a fraction of that. Which brings us to the 50 miles per gallon story, the one that closes more motorcycle sales than any spec sheet. The mileage figure is true. The savings are not. At 2,500 miles a year and 50 miles per gallon, the bike burns 50 gallons, about $200 of fuel, and many performance engines want premium. The car covering those same miles would have burned roughly $400. Your annual fuel savings, $200. That's the number doing all the work in the justification speech, and it doesn't cover the helmet. It doesn't cover one rear tire. The economy argument for motorcycle ownership fails in the first 10 minutes of arithmetic, which is why the industry never actually makes it with numbers. It makes it with a photograph of a canyon road. And notice what that photograph is doing. It's selling the one part of the product no spreadsheet can audit. The wind, the lean angle, the empty road, all real, all genuinely unavailable in any car at any price. The trick isn't that the feeling is fake. The trick is attaching a fuel economy number to it so the feeling can be filed under transportation and the purchase can be explained to a spouse as savings. This is where the first real trap opens, and it's not mechanical, it's the loan. Power sports financing is its own world, and it's built around one awkward fact. The monthly payment on a $25,000 toy has to look small enough to say yes to on a Saturday afternoon. The solution is time. Motorcycle loans now stretch to 72 and even 84 months, 7 years of payments on a machine that does 2,000 miles a year and sheds value like a sport coat. Rates run higher than car loans because lenders know exactly what a discretionary vehicle is. It's the payment that stops first when a household gets in trouble and repossessed bikes come back cheap and crashed. So, the lender prices that you sign at 9 or 11% instead of 6, and the depreciation curve crosses your loan balance somewhere in year 2. From that point on, you owe $19,000 on a machine worth $13,000. You don't own a motorcycle, you own the gap, and the gap has a favorite trick. Around month 18, the itch arrives. The next bike, the bigger one, the one you actually wanted. The dealership is delighted to help. They take your bike in trade, quietly roll the $4,000 you're underwater into the new loan, and the payment only goes up $60. Riders repeat this cycle 2, 3, 4 times, each trade folding the last mistake into the next principal. The industry doesn't fight the upgrade itch. The industry is the upgrade itch. And when the garage finally settles, it often settles at more than one bike. A commuter, a weekend bike, a project in the corner. Each one carrying its own insurance policy, its own aging tires, its own battery on a charger. Nothing about motorcycle math improves when you multiply it. And for the riders who bought the fast one, there's a second ladder running parallel to the upgrade ladder. The track. It starts as the responsible choice. Public roads are a terrible place to find out what a supersport does at full lean, so you book a track day. $200 to $350 for the entry. Then you learn that one aggressive track day eats most of a $300 rear tire, that your street insurance excludes the track entirely so every session is self-insured, and that the fast guys in your run group all have dedicated track bikes with crash protection, spare wheels, and a trailer to haul it all. The hobby that justified the bike quietly becomes its own hobby with its own budget, and the $12,999 you started with is now the smallest number in a spreadsheet you've stopped showing anyone. Now, here's the other side of the ledger, because somebody is doing very well in this industry, and it's worth seeing exactly who. Walk back into that dealership and look at it as a business. The new bike, remember, made them $700. The finance office made more than that on your loan origination, your extended warranty, and your gap coverage before you reach the parking lot. The apparel wall runs 40 to 50% margins. The t-shirts and jackets are better business than the machines. The service department bills $120 to $150 an hour against those valve checks and tire swaps. And the used side is the quiet champion. Take a bike in trade at the underwater number, recondition it for a few $100s, retail it for $2,000 over. The showroom floor full of gleaming new metal is an anchor store. The money is in the orbit around it. Go up one level and the pattern repeats. Harley-Davidson, the most famous motorcycle company on earth, operates a financial services arm that finances the majority of its new US bikes. And in the soft years for the showroom, lending has carried an outsized share of the company's operating income. The same company licenses its badge onto boots, wallets, and shirts bought by people who will never hold a motorcycle license. Read that structure plainly. The machine is the marketing. The lending and the identity are the business. An entire industry discovered decades ago that what it actually sells is membership, and that membership monetizes beautifully whether or not any particular motorcycle ever starts. You can see the same logic in what manufacturers choose not to fix. The industry's most discussed problem is the new rider pipeline, and its most profitable products are $25,000 and up machines aimed at riders on their 5th bike. Small, cheap, sensible motorcycles exist, and they're better than they've ever been. A brand new 300 cubic centimeter bike costs $5,500, sips fuel for real, and does everything a beginner needs. The margins on it are a rounding error. The buyer keeps it 2 years and the marketing budget flows elsewhere. The showroom is arranged, the financing is structured, and the media is produced to walk you past the sensible machine toward the aspirational one. Because the aspirational one carries the margin, the loan, and the accessory catalog. None of this is a conspiracy. It's just what every mature identity business does.